In this episode, I'll cover an article by Professor Joseph Salerno at Mises.org entitled The Danger of Deflation Phobia. Professor Salerno opens the article with a funny little confession that he loves falling prices. You know, it's funny because deflation's one of those things where everyone privately agrees that lower prices are a great thing. But for some reason, in crowds, people are afraid to admit such a seemingly common sense thing. Professor Salerno then proceeds to bring up the fact that deflation is a feature, not a bug, of a genuinely free market economy. In a genuinely free market economy, one in which the government doesn't artificially inflate the money supply, deflation would be commonplace due to the forces of competition and innovation constantly putting downward pressure on prices. In fact, we should have much more deflation today. But alas, we don't have a genuinely free market economy. In today's economy, government money printing via the Federal Reserve essentially cancels out lower prices made by innovation and increased productivity. Under this central banking regime, the best we can hope for is either zero inflation or very slow and gradual inflation. Every time the marketplace naturally develops something to lower prices, the government steps in and prints more money, thus further devaluing our currency and preventing the natural free market tendency towards falling prices. To this end, Professor Salerno floats a new term called deflation phobia. He then further details the natural market phenomenon of falling prices, which I just mentioned, in the following quote, natural deflation is caused by improvements in technology and increased capital investment that introduce new products on the market and lower the cost of existing products. The result is an increase in supplies of both new and existing goods in the economy. End quote. In other words, more supply equals lower prices. Professor Salerno then contrasts our current fiat unbacked paper currency system with a gold standard, wherein the government would be severely constrained in its ability to print dollars out of thin air and cancel out lower prices brought about by improved technologies and other market innovations. Now, this podcast loves anything that promotes sound money like gold and silver. But the professor here is playing correct regardless. It deserves repeating a million times. 99% of big government problems would essentially disappear overnight with the reimplementation of sound money like gold and silver. Any problem you have with big government, whether it be forever wars or cradle to grave welfare statism, all of it is made infinitely more possible by the government having its own printing press. But in this particular instance, the prevention of lower prices brought about by the natural forces of supply and demand in the free market economy, the straight up printing of money itself is the problem. Regardless of what the government's doing, more money printing equals more dollar devaluation, which prevents consumers from enjoying the fruits of lower prices. Again, every time there's a cost-cutting breakthrough in the private sector, in the marketplace, what would otherwise be passed on to consumers in the form of lower prices gets canceled out because our government knifes in and creates more inflation via more money printing. Thankfully, you don't have to take my word for all of this. Professor Salerno gives examples of natural, consumer-friendly deflation back when America was closest to a genuinely free market and had a commodity currency. He points out that prices fell by over 50% between 1819 and 1860. Furthermore, he points out that between 1870 and 1898, prices fell by almost another half, with wholesale prices dropping by 34% and consumer prices falling by 47%. Basically, when you have a genuinely free market, coupled with sound money like gold and silver, as our founding fathers originally established and wanted us to maintain, you naturally wind up with lower prices. It's a beautiful thing. So, who's against such a thing? Easy answer, all the crooks. Bureaucrats are against this because they wish to control the printing press, and they view sound money as a check on their delusions of infinite power. The military-industrial complex hates sound money because they want to endlessly fatten their wallets with forever wars. Corrupt Wall Street hates sound money because they want their stocks to never stop inflating. Never mind the fact that very little real private sector growth is actually happening under this fiat, unbacked, paper, funny money system. And this is just to name a few of the bad actors. So it's time to reapply common sense to our economy and stop fearing lower prices. It's time we say no to the corrupt, crazy, and disingenuous pro-inflation crooks. Enough is enough. End the Fed and restore sound money.